There was a man in the mid-16th century whose name was Peter Stump, and he was arrested and he was executed in one of the most blood-curdling and unbearably horrific of ways. He was first to be broken on a wheel, and then the flesh was to be torn from his body in 10 places with red-hot pincers, at which point he had his limbs crushed, and he was beheaded, and his body was burnt on a pyre, and he joined his daughter and mistress in death in that respect. And his crime was, I mean, by modern standards, pretty fucked as well, actually. He was convicted of killing and devouring 14 children and 2 women, of which he said in mitigation that while doing that, he was in the shape of a monstrous wolf, a shape that he brought upon himself by putting on a belt that had been gifted to him by the devil. And you can see why I picked that as a sort of introduction to this look at the folklore of Bloodborne, because the nature of man's inhumanity to man, the changing of man into beast, and ultimately the forces that have caused that are all very, very central to Bloodborne itself. Now, am I going to fight this werewolf? Probably not. I feel like if I die now it's going to be very embarrassing, so I think I might just dodge past it. Also, I am very, very fucking rusty at this game now. I haven't played it in 1,000 years, even though it's even though it's, well, off to a great start, even though it's one of my favourite games of the last generation. In fact, I think it is. Oh, see you later, fucker. Even though I think it is my favourite game of the last generation. What are you still doing here? That's fucked. In my head, this was a much more dramatic moment, you know. I was like, oh, Peter Stump, he was, see you later, he was convicted of this, blah blah blah, and that's how we get onto Bloodborne. And I was gonna run and open this gate, and then we were gonna look out on this bridge, which is obviously like ridiculously heavily inspired by the Charles Bridge in Prague, and that was going to be amazing. It's less dramatic now, but my god, that is still incredibly beautiful. Like I said, this is my favourite game of this generation, I think. I love Souls in general, but there's something about the standalone nature of Bloodborne and how well its internal lore hangs together and how well it's married to gameplay mechanics that makes me really go, fucking hell, this is fantastic. So in this first episode of this look at the folklore and inspirations behind Bloodborne, I'm going to be discussing gothic fiction, taking a brief sojourn through gothic architecture and the inspirations behind all of that, and its reflections within British society and European society, and then taking a look later on at the werewolf myth. And later episodes are going to have looks at everything from the nature of the beast, how come, my god, the nature of lakes and the seas in Lovecraft and cosmic horror, which obviously heavily inspired, there you go, obviously heavily inspired Bloodborne, all the way through to what is the nature of the unseen, through ghost fiction, through vampire fiction, through the nature of degradation of society. Basically, I'm going to be taking a look at everything I can think of that has an effect on Bloodborne. So we're going to start, first of all, by heading over to the Hunter's Dream, which, we'll be looking at dreams in a later episode. But I just want to, I wish I could Eternal Sunshine my way back to, I wish I could Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind my way back to the first time I played this, and just get to experience it again for the first time. I don't know if you could hear it. I think the volume settings are okay, but not perfect. That was the Cleric Beast, which we do fight eventually on the edge of Charles Bridge there. But, I know, it's just the level of detail in this. These spires, all these flying buttresses. I mean, you never go in there, but the fact that there is this kind of open window into, with a chandelier. Thinking for the first time when I actually got here, holy shit, I'm in for a treat. And I'd waited 6 months to afford a PS4, so honestly, it felt like by the time I actually got around to playing it, I feel like the delay there made me really appreciate exactly how perfect this game is. So we're going to head over to the Hunter stream now, and then I'm going to start talking about the nature of Gothic fiction and how that has inspired Bloodborne. So there's a fantastic TED talk, a TED-Ed talk that gives a whistle-stop tour of Gothic fiction, which I'm going to summarize now. So, and it goes back a long fucking way, you know. So the Roman Empire, it was beset by Goths on its sort of northern and eastern flanks. And the Goths are a sort of Teutonic, Germanic collection of tribes who would harry the Romans, and eventually they would become employed by mercenaries, the Romans. And the Ostrogoths, eventually, who were sort of the northwestern faction, I guess, took Rome. And they deposed their leaders, and they sort of seized political and, well, military power for themselves. At which point, they... Yeah, not abandoned though, are you? Apparently, you can see her tapping a finger, which I've never actually seen, but I've got it on the authority of EMB and a bunch of other commentators, Farty Vidya, you know, those guys, that she taps her finger even now, which, you know, bit of a hint that she's not all she seems already. So the Ostrogoths took Rome, and they contributed to the sack of Rome, and eventually the decline of the Roman Empire. At which point we see the Dark Ages. I'm going to go back and eventually do a video looking at the intro to this, and particularly looking at what the nature of the messengers and why we've been chosen. In the meantime, though, I believe we've got a date with Gehrman, and then we'll go back to the nature of Gothic fiction.
Aha! You must be the new hunter. Welcome to the Hunter's Dream. This will be your home for now. I am Gehrman.
That is a fantastic hint about how long he's actually been here. I mean, he is the first hunter.
You're in a fine haze about now, but don't think too hard about all of this. Just go out and kill a few beasts. It's for your own good.
Ah, there's so much to unpick there.
It's just what hunters do. You'll get used to it.
He seems trustworthy, and also definitely not like he will eventually be an antagonist. To escape this dreadful hunter's dream, hold the source of the spreading scourge of beasts, lest the night carry on forever. So just a brief look at the mechanics of this. I'm actually going to spend a lot of time building up my strength. Eventually I'm going to be running a dex build, but for now I feel like I stand the best chance of getting through these encounters, and therefore not having, you know, to piss everybody off in the audience, if I run a bit of a strength build with my Hunter's Axe for now. I made the mistake of streaming a little bit of Dark Souls 2 before now, so I am obviously clearly going to have a problem changing weapon form, and also just healing at every opportunity. So that's going to be very annoying. Yeah, so the Dark Ages that the Goths had sort of imposed upon Europe by breaking up the Roman Empire, that led to an architectural change which began in Paris and sort of spread everywhere. It abandoned the Enlightenment, well, it abandoned the traditional emphasis on columns and thick walls and lines in favour of things like flying buttresses and spires, and this was kind of what you think of as ancient Gothic architecture. And it was originally derogatorily called that by a bunch of Enlightenment thinkers who, well, early Renaissance thinkers who suddenly went, okay, right, well, these Dark Ages have been a little bit shit for everybody. Whose fault is this? It's the Goths. So they started derogatorily referring to all this Gothic architecture as, well, Gothic. Holy shit, it's been a long time since I played this game. I completely forgot about this guy. And also to equip a weapon. If in doubt, run the fuck away. There we go. So yeah, that architectural style became sort of derogatorily known as Gothic, and eventually, you know, we had the Enlightenment, and there was this return to columns, and there was a return to clean lines and all this stuff that we'd had from ancient Rome that was kind of typified by the old Colosseum. Whoa, no. And that's something else I'm going to have to get reused to. Regain as a game mechanic. And so there was this return to columns, and obviously over the course of the Renaissance, people started emphasizing that sort of stuff again. But in the UK, there then became, well, before it was the UK, there became this... Goths v Romans has become a sort of typified conflict, a sort of archetypal conflict between nature and what we might think of as northern British, well, what northern British people like to think of as their greatest strengths, a sort of emphasis on nature and a sort of hardy, resistant stock that they thought was typified by the Goths, who, it must be said, had some genuinely pretty laudable qualities. They were very literate. They were among the first people to have a consistent and well-known writing system. And a lot of what we're actually going to talk about later, the sort of nature of werewolves and everything, we only know that. We only have so much information about the early nature of the werewolf myth because the Goths wrote so much down. Which, I mean... Okay, got the timing down on that. They were also fiercely proud of the fact that they respected women, which, as we'll see later, isn't necessarily a particularly common thing in Gothic literature, and also the fact that they prized monogamy, which, again, that's not something that was necessarily known during the Roman Empire. So it became this sort of... The British people seized on the identity of Gothic as a moral imperative rather than just an architectural system. And we saw that reflected in the Civil War and in the Reformation and in the Counter-Reformation. And at the start of 1716, we saw what was the beginning of what's known as the Gothic revival of architecture, which is kind of typified by British abbey ruins, which were destroyed during the Reformation. And people like William Wordsworth really helped bring Gothic architecture back into popularity. He wrote a poem specifically about Tinson Abbey, Not Fucking Around With You Yet, in which he sort of codified the idea that there was nobility and there was inherent grace and things worth shouting about in Gothic architecture. Fucking hell, I tell you what, this server's still quite busy. Happy with that. Fuck you. So, yeah, the British seized upon this Gothic idea, and, we went back and forth on it. There's still debate about whether Gothic architecture is actually worth, celebrating, or whether we should actually... I fucking knew it was going to happen. Or whether we should instead be concentrating on what you might think of as more classical, ancient Roman architecture. And there's a long way from there to Gothic fiction, but know that there's a through line. There's a through line from Gothic architecture all the way through to, what we think of as modern Goths. The people who I was in my youth, who would dress in black and, have your hair ridiculous. I mean, now I don't have that much hair, which is very annoying, but... And so you can sort of see this crossover between Gothic architecture and Gothic literature in the figure of Horace Walpole, who... He was the author of what you might think of as the archetypal original Gothic novel, The Castle of Otranto. But he claimed that he had the inspiration for his... Why did I come back here? The inspiration for his... Yeah, there we go. His home, Strawberry Hill, in London. He said he got it from a dream. Which, that's actually quite typical for him, because he also wrote The Castle of Otranto after wakening from a dream. It's one of those things where, obviously, the nature of dreams is integral to Bloodborne as well. But it's just one of those things where life imitates... The relationship between dreams and reality is...
Out on the hunt?
Loose, even in real life, you might say.
But I cannot open this door. I am Yosefka. The patients here in my clinic must not be exposed to infection. I know that you hunt for us, for our town, but I'm sorry. Please. This is all that I can do.
So this is
Now,
the original Yosefka.
go. And good hunting.
I'm going to be completely honest, the first time I played through this, I had no idea that she gets replaced. Oh, spoilers. She gets replaced by a member of the choir who's conducting experiments, of their ilk. And we'll get into the nature of, cosmic horror later on. But Yosefka as this kind of virtuous, noble doctor is something that's kind of absent from a lot of Gothic fiction. She's a unique character, and it's a real shame that she vanishes so early into the narrative. Because try and think of a genuinely... I mean, the nature of Gothic fiction means that everybody's shades of grey, nobody's wholly virtuous. I'm going to stop talking for a bit while I fight this guy. Like I said, it's been a long time since I played Bloodborne. So I should probably concentrate. Nope, I'm fucked. Nope. Okay, that's a gimme. And I missed it. And I'm fucked. Oh, nice. Actually, I think... Does this guy get knocked down? No. But does get... Shh. Fucking... Okay, there you go. Oh. Hunter's Axe. Thank Christ. Oh. So, Gothic architecture. Spires. Sharp angles. Flying buttresses. I know I've said flying buttresses a lot. Not just because, the word is funny, but because you get to see them a lot in Souls architecture. Soulsborne architecture. FromSoft seem to have this particular affinity for flying buttresses. You only have to look at the cathedral that contains the painting in Dark Souls, the painting in Dark Souls 1, to see that they really have an affinity for that kind of skeletal arcing structure. And so Gothic architecture began a sort of trend for... It began in Europe as a sort of trend for wild and rugged gardens that people thought fucking kidding me? That people thought reflected the, the hardy nature of those people. And it became popular to have ruins of abbeys that were destroyed during the Reformation in your garden, to the point where if you didn't have ruins in your garden, it was popular to actually create some. So you would create sort of artificial ruins in your garden just so you could say, actually, you know what, guys, I know what's popular and I've got this sort of stuff. And it was because in Britain, at least, it was evidence of this hard-won cultural identity that, I think it's been described as, if you had ruins in your garden, you would be a guardian of a Protestant heritage. And there's always been this confusion between moral and architectural, virtuousness in British culture. And the book I'm using as reference for this... Oh my god. I've not played this in forever, and I'm trying to describe architecture? Okay, regain, thank fuck. It makes mention of the fact that there's two distinct types of Gothic architecture, one of which is, ancient, with sort of beams and pillars and what you might think of as sort of the archetypical tomb. And then there's modern Gothic, which is wild, and it's kind of replete with roses and crosses and ornamentation. And so if you see a modern British cathedral, it's more than likely to be modern Gothic, just because we like a little bit of ornamentation. We like to think we're fancy. Nope. Got a plan. Plan's off to a great start. Yeah! Love the axe. Like I said, eventually I'm going to go through axe to rifle spear, maybe eventually the Blades of Mercy, with the eventual aim of getting the Rakuyo, which I think is just the best weapon in the game. Not just because of its association with Lady Maria, but just because it has such interesting lore implications as well. And so Horace Walpole, the man who created this kind of faux Gothic, or rather Gothic revival, Strawberry Hill, he did that deliberately. He took a townhouse and he built it up over the course of 30 years to be a sort of Gothic pile. You can hear that guy through there banging on it. And yeah, he claimed he dreamt this thing up, which is kind of ridiculous. Alright, I'm gonna stop talking about Gothic fiction and Gothic architecture for now, just because I feel like this part can give you trouble enough when you're au fait with the game, and I haven't played it in so long. Pebble continues to be the best item in any Souls game. Just keep attacking. That's all. That's what I remember about Bloodborne. Particularly for what I'm going to call the final boss. Why did I do that? The Orphan of Kos, who is just... The second phase of that is just a mess. You just got to constantly attack, attack, attack. But I love that they've built the sort of... this savage nature of combat in Bloodborne into the lore. You know, you have to constantly attack. The beast blood is constantly threatening to overwhelm you. I just think it's absolutely fascinating. Also of note is the fact that, unlike most of Dark Souls and Dark Souls 2, enemies will roam. They have these preset paths and they'll walk around it, which really does... that doesn't look particularly great, but it really does give you this sensation that this is a living city, you know, for a given value of living at this point. Yep, come on, fucker. Okay, I'm getting back into it. Yes! I could feel it coming. Shit. Oh. Terrible. Terrible. Take a lap. Just the sheer amount of design and thought that has gone into that. I'm a little bit disappointed that you don't get to explore more of Central Yharnam than the sort of 7 or 8 streets that we do. I know that you get to go down into the sewers, and I've actually got something I want to say specifically about those sewers, because I think there is something that a lot of other commentators have missed about what's happening there, which it's such a rich game in terms of just environmental storytelling. I mean, the fact that this guy has a shield, and the fact that FromSoft take the piss out of gamers who use a shield, you know, mocking the sword and board mentality that a lot of people use to, that I used to get through Dark Souls. It's just phenomenal. I love it so much. Oh, more guys. And shots. And we'll talk about that werewolf up there in a second. I just want to get these guys out. But there is a particularly Victoriana aesthetic to this part of Central Yharnam. It's also taken heavy influence from Prague and from a couple of other Eastern European cities. But the idea that Yharnam is a city with these traps, with these carriages, with all this ornamentation, it all speaks to this particularly Eastern European and British, British Gothic aesthetic. It's just incredible. But the fact that it's also partially based on Edinburgh, the idea of this city that's built upon catacombs and a city, actually becomes not only integral to the lore, but allows for all this incredible speculation about, you know, how far back does the Scourge of the Beastblood go in the world of Bloodborne. And I remember something that Penny Arcade's Tycho said when Resident Evil 4 was coming out, that he's more scared of enemies that are cognizant of what they're doing and recognize that that they understand the implications of their actions is a lot scarier than the sort of mindless nature of zombies and everything. And I feel like that's definitely true. I'm significantly more scared of a lot of Bloodborne enemies than I am of Dark Souls enemies, because they're, you know, hollow, they are reduced to just pure id and impulse, whereas Bloodborne enemies have this kind of, there's something there, there's a consciousness. And again, we're going to get into, you know, the progression of Gothic fiction from...
I don't reckon you're from round here. Well, stuck outside on a night of the hunt. Oh, you poor, poor thing.
Apologies if anybody can hear me swallowing. I've got a can of beer here that I'm, you know, slowly working my way through as NPCs talk, and if that's affecting anybody's misophonia, I'm so sorry. I have that really badly myself. I'm covering the microphone as I do it, but if that's not enough, I'm really fucking sorry. It's the worst thing in the world. You know what? I played too much Breath of the Wild, and I nearly went to click the left stick in there to sneak up on him, which would have been... Nope, way too late. Come on, you fucker. Yep. As to why these guys are huge, Oh shit, me. As are huge as opposed to the sort of more lean, more obviously, you know, wolf-like other guys. I don't know. I think maybe it was just a gameplay concern. I think they went, we need more enemy types. Okay, that's one. I think they went, we need more distinct enemy types in the main game. There's certainly something to be said about, you know, when people become more bestial, they do increase in size. You know, you only have to look at Incredible Hulk. You only have to look at more modern depictions of Mr. Hyde from Jekyll and Hyde to see that they like to think that when you get more bestial, you become huge. But I honestly think it's a gameplay concern.